Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I want to start today with a scenario, and I think this is going to resonate painfully with pretty much everyone listening.
Okay.
It's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. You have this massive to-do list. Your inbox is just full. Slack notifications are going off. But instead of tackling it, you stop.
Right.
Maybe you pick up a book for 20 minutes or you sit in your chair and stare out the window to, think about a problem.
And then right onto you comes the guilt.
The guilt, it's crushing. It's that voice in your head saying, what are you doing? You aren't producing. You aren't typing. You aren't cleaning.
We have this really deep-seated belief that if our hands aren't moving or if we're not sweating, we're not actually working.
Yes, it's the classic productivity trap. We confuse motion with progress.
We think busyness is the same thing as effectiveness.
Exactly. And to unpack this, we're going to look at a source that tackles this exact tension. But we aren't looking at some modern productivity guru or, a Silicon Valley CEO.
We're going way back.
We are going way back. We're looking at a sermon that was delivered on April 24th, 1870.
1870, so the Victorian era.
The source is the absolute titan of Victorian preaching, C.H. Spurgeon. And the title of the text is Martha and Mary.
And before anyone tunes out thinking, okay, this is just a religious history lesson, let me frame the mission here.
Please.
Spurgeon is doing something that is, well, it's incredibly psychologically astute. He is essentially building a profile of two distinct personality types.
And these are types that you see in every organization, every team.
And honestly, inside every single one of us, you have the Martha spirit, which is active, busy, hustle culture.
A little prone to burnout.
Oh, very prone to burnout.
Yeah.
And then you have the Mary spirit, which is contemplative, receptive, deep.
And the argument Spurgeon makes isn't just one is good, one is bad. It's more complex than that.
It is. It's about why one is the necessary fuel for the other. It's a study in physics, really. Where does the energy for the work even come from?
So let's set the scene. This is based on a famous narrative from the biblical book of Luke. Jesus enters a village, goes into a house. Martha is the hostess.
And she is in full gear.
Total hostess mode.
Yeah.
Spurgeon describes her as rushing around to prepare a sumptuous entertainment. She wants everything perfect.
She's cooking, cleaning, managing all the logistics.
And then there's her sister, Mary.
Right.
While Martha is frantically trying to get the roast out of the oven, Mary is just sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to him talk.
And naturally, friction ensues.
Oh, absolutely. Martha gets overwhelmed. The text says she was cumbered about much serving.
That word cumbered, it does a lot of heavy lifting there. It means weighed down, distracted, hemmed in.
So she snaps. She goes to Jesus and basically files a complaint. She says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me.
And Jesus gives this famous reply. Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting. Because typically people read this and they think, okay, Martha is the villain.
Right. She's worldly, she's superficial, she just doesn't get it.
But Spurgeon starts his whole analysis by defending her.
Which is so surprising. He spends quite a bit of time saying Martha isn't worldly in the bad sense. She isn't out partying. She's not ignoring Jesus.
Her motivation is actually noble.
It is. She's an earnest believer trying to honor a guest. The conflict, according to Spurgeon, it doesn't come from the work itself. It comes from her state of mind.
She is cumbered.
Exactly. She's overwhelmed by the logistics, and more importantly, she becomes critical of the person who isn't working the way she is.
She stops focusing on the guest and starts focusing on the fairness of it all.
Yes, the labor distribution.
So let's unpack this Martha spirit. Because Spurgeon argues this wasn't just a problem for a woman in the first century. He says this spirit is very prevalent.
In the church, and by extension in our modern organizations, he calls it the desire to make a fair show in the flesh.
A fair show in the flesh. That is such a Victorian way of describing what we would call optics.
Or performative productivity.
It's the obsession with the external. Spurgeon goes into this fantastic critique of how people get obsessed with the container rather than the contents.
He gives these really specific examples, like people demanding the architecture has to be correctly Gothic.
Right. The building must be Gothic, the music must be chaste and aesthetic, the preaching has to be eloquent.
Spurgeon is pointing out that the Martha spirit loves things that can be measured and seen.
It's the idea that if the presentation is perfect, the result must be good. If the website looks great, the company must be healthy.
Precisely. And Spurgeon says, quite bluntly that God doesn't care if worship happens in a cathedral or a barn. He's looking at the heart.
But the Martha spirit is obsessed with the cathedral.
Because the cathedral is impressive, it's a status symbol.
And this leads to what we might call the practical fallacy.
Hmm.
This part really stood out to me because I hear this argument all the time today.
The bias toward action.
Yes. The tendency to dismiss deep thinking or theory as just unpractical.
Spurgeon quotes the critics of his day. They would say things like, forget the theology, forget the doctrine. Let's focus on ragged schools and soup kitchens.
And just for context, ragged schools were charitable schools for destitute children in Victorian England.
So the argument sounds really good, right? It sounds moral. Stop arguing about words and go feed the poor.
It's hard to argue with that. But Spurgeon pushes back.
He pushes back hard. He says these critics dismiss theological questions as trifles for schoolmen of the Dark Ages.
But his counterargument is profound.
It is. He says that if you despise the root, which is the truth, the doctrine, the deep understanding, you eventually lose the fruit.
The practical charity.
That's it. You can't have the soup kitchen, or at least you can't sustain it long term, without the deep conviction that drives you to feed people in the first place.
If you cut off the source, the stream just dries up.
You might have a flurry of activity for a while, but eventually, without the why, without the deep thought, it all becomes hollow.
Speaking of hollow, there is another darker side to the Martha spirit that Spurgeon highlights, and that's the ego.
This is where the psychological profile gets really sharp. Spurgeon notes that Martha wanted her service to be a credit to her house.
Credit to her house. So, look how well I am hosting.
It's subtle, but it's there. And Spurgeon uses this absolutely hilarious analogy to illustrate how we overinflate our own importance.
Oh, the fly on the cathedral.
The fly on St. Paul's Cathedral.
I laughed out loud at this. Paint the picture for us.
So imagine the massive dome of St. Paul's in London. And there's a tiny fly sitting right on top of it.
Okay.
And this fly looks down at the streets below, the carriages, the thousands of people moving around. And the fly thinks to himself, wow, if I were to fly away, all this traffic would stop.
The whole city is regulated by my presence.
That is such a burn. But think about how often we feel that in our job.
Oh, constantly. If I don't send this email right now, the project collapses.
If I don't attend this meeting, the department fails. It's the folly of thinking the work depends entirely on us.
Spurgeon calls it self-importance. And he actually gets quite sarcastic here about the bureaucracy of his day. He mentions Exeter Hall,
which was the big meeting place in London for all the religious and charitable societies. It was the hub of the Victorian nonprofit industrial complex.
And Spurgeon is basically mocking the idea that you need a society, a secretary, and a committee to do anything good.
Right. He says people think you can't save a soul without a committee and a secretary. He contrasts that with apostolic simplicity.
So we build these massive structures, the committees, the funds, the reports, because they make us feel important.
They are the Martha spirit running wild. We confuse the machinery of work with the actual work.
And for Martha, this obsession with the machinery had a real cost. It wasn't just that she was busy, it changed her.
It made her fretful. Spurgeon paints this picture of her trying to get the side dish and the joint of meat and the wine all perfect at the exact same moment.
And when you try to juggle that many externals, things inevitably go wrong.
And when they go wrong, you get vexed.
And you get judgmental. This is the key. Martha tries to force Mary to serve.
She wants to drag Mary into her own busyness. And this is where Spurgeon talks about the voluntary principle.
That forced service is worthless.
Exactly. He talks about cankered money and beggarly pittances. If you shame people into working or giving, or if you coerce them, you might get the output, but you don't get the quality. You don't get the heart.
Okay, so let's pivot to Mary. Because if Martha is the trap of busyness, Mary is the engine of power.
But again, to the outside observer, to the Martha in all of us, Mary just looks like she's sitting there doing nothing.
And that's the misunderstanding Spurgeon is trying to correct. He reframes sitting not as idleness, but as the process of filling the fountainhead.
He uses that great industrial metaphor, the steam engine.
Right. Tell us about that.
He says Mary was getting the steam ready. Imagine a mill. You have the millstones that grind the corn. That's the activity. That's Martha.
All that motion.
But if the millstones are clattering away and there's no corn and no power driving them, it's just noise and wear and tear. It's motion without progress.
Mary is ensuring there's power before the motion starts.
Exactly. Which brings us to what I think is the real ha-ha moment in the text.
Okay.
Because Spurgeon argues that Mary's sitting wasn't just passive listening. It allowed her to understand something that Martha completely missed.
This is a crucial point. Because Mary sat and listened, she grasped the reality of what was happening.
That Jesus was going to die. Martha was too busy cooking a dinner for a living celebrity. Mary realized she was sitting at the feet of a sacrifice.
And that understanding led to action. And this is what I love. Spurgeon points out that Mary actually performed a greater act of service than Martha ever did.
The alabaster box. Later in the gospel narrative, Mary anoints Jesus with this incredibly expensive ointment. And Spurgeon argues she did this because she knew it was for his burial.
She had the timing right.
She did. And he talks about originality of service. I want to highlight that phrase. He says Martha did the commonplace thing. She made a dinner.
Anyone can make a dinner.
Right. It was standard. It was expected. But because Mary had been contemplating, she struck out what Spurgeon calls a spark of light from herself.
She did something unique. She broke the mold.
And Spurgeon's argument is that you cannot be original. You cannot do deep, impactful work if you are just running on the treadmill of commonplace busyness.
That is so huge for creative work today. If you're just reacting, answering emails, doing what the schedule says, you're just making dinner.
You're doing the commonplace. Innovation requires the pause. And notice the timing. Martha wanted everything done on her time, right now.
For the meal.
But Mary knew how to take Christ's time. She kept the ointment for the fit moment. That's the discipline of the Mary spirit. It's not about being slow. It's about being opportune.
So what does this all mean? Spurgeon isn't saying everyone quit your jobs and go sit in a monastery.
No, and he's very clear on that. He says, no man is as he should be unless he is active and diligent. The goal isn't to be Mary instead of Martha.
It's to be Mary and Martha.
Exactly. He uses King David as the example from Psalm 23. David knew the green pastures, which is the contemplative, the rest.
But he also knew the still waters.
Or, as Spurgeon interprets the Hebrew, the waters that go softly or progressively. You need both, the pasture and the stream.
And he applies this to his own time. And the parallels to the modern world are, well, they're really striking. He talks about nonconformists.
Who are basically the Protestants outside the Church of England. And he warns them against becoming merely political.
It's a fascinating historical nugget. He sees them fighting for rights and political position, and he warns them. Don't forget the brown heather of Scotland.
And what he means is he's referencing the Covenanters, these Scottish Presbyterians who are persecuted and killed for their faith. They died for truth, not just for political win.
So he's saying, if your movement becomes just about the external politics, the voting, the lobbying, and it loses its spiritual core.
It's dead. It becomes a shell. He says the same thing about missions. You can't just throw money at the problem.
Right. He says you can't save souls with just committees and monies. You need power from the right hand of the Most High.
It's that same theme again. The machinery, Martha, is useless without the steam, Mary.
There's one more story he tells that I thought was beautiful, the anecdote about the rain.
Oh, the Irish gentleman. Yes.
Tell us that one.
So he mentions an Irish gentleman who observed a gardener watering the grass in the blazing hot sun. And the gentleman points out that this doesn't do much good.
The water just evaporates. It might even burn the grass.
It's futile effort. But he says when the clouds are gathered and the atmosphere is right, when it rains, everything turns green.
So you can't force the growth.
You can't. And Spurgeon applies this to revivals, big spiritual movements. You can't manufacture a revival by just watering the grass, just using methods and plans and organizing events.
You have to wait for the atmosphere to be right. You have to sit at the feet of the Master first. You have to change the atmosphere through prayer and contemplation.
And then the rain comes. Then the work is effective.
Such a powerful reminder that you can't force an outcome just by working harder. Sometimes the harder you work without that atmospheric change, the more damage you do.
And that leads to his final warning, which is really stark. He says if you work without refueling, without that merry spirit, you are killing the steed by spurring it.
That's a brutal image. You're riding the horse, spurring it to go faster, but you haven't fed it, so you're just driving it to death.
And he also says you are building hovels of clay instead of palaces of marble. If your internal life is shallow, your external work will be shoddy.
It doesn't matter how busy you are. If you're building with clay, it's still a hovel.
Exactly. So we need to balance the serving with the sitting. We need to be like the fly who realizes he doesn't control the traffic.
And maybe spend a little more time getting the steam ready before we try to turn the mill.
Precisely. Activity without spirituality or without deep thought is just noise.
I want to leave our listener with a thought to chew on today. We talk about how Mary's contemplation led to originality of service. She did something unique that no one else thought of.
Right.
So here is the question. If you are feeling stuck doing commonplace things, just the same routine, the same grind, the same solutions as everyone else, is it possible that the reason you haven't found a new spark or a new solution is simply because you haven't spent enough time sitting still?
That's the question. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is stop.
Thanks for diving in with us. I'll see you next time.